Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special series, the first part in this series on GraphQL APIs with my lovely friend Eve. Eve, hello.
Hello, hello.
It's going to be so much fun. We've been planning this for quite some time, but life has gotten to us. So finally, we can get together and do this.
Today's the day. I can't wait. I know.
So some of you all may know Eve for like the amazing stuff she does in the community, the books she's written, and most of all, some of you might have attended some of her Moon Highway courses if you've been lucky enough from your different companies to hire her. Do you want to tell us a little bit about like what you do, what you're excited about, all the GraphQL things you do?
Yeah, we teach a ton of GraphQL. So we teach a lot of organizations who are in the beginning of their process of migrating to GraphQL. And our job is to come in and kind of get people excited about a new technology that they might be a little bit hesitant about. So we kind of did that a lot with Node in the past and React, and GraphQL is the latest in those that requires a big organizational shift. So that's what we're usually trying to make palatable to people. So
are you usually teaching front-end teams, back-end teams?
Yeah, a little bit of both. It's really a huge effort to get GraphQL rolled out because it touches so many parts of the stack. So there's a lot of backend folks and a lot of front end folks that end up in our workshops, as well as like product managers and anyone who really deals with data is really part of the picture. So a lot of different folks.
Love it. Well, this is going to be a really fun series. Hopefully you all enjoy. And, the first episode is going to be about understanding GraphQL microservices. So Eve, take it away. I'm so excited.
Nice. So this is a conversation really about like, how do we work with GraphQL at scale? It's really fun to think about kind of how GraphQL works from a basic perspective where we send queries, we make a schema, those types of things. But when we start to roll this out at our organization more, more fully, it really has lended itself well to creating GraphQL microservices instead of one big schema that contains all of our APIs types. So I can share my screen with y'all here.
Sure.
Basically, and let me go back. This repository here, moonhighway.com or moonhighway/Federation Nation, I should say, contains all of the files for a larger format class that we teach on all of this. So you can find this and use this to kind of supplement your knowledge. There are different branches for different steps. So if you want to build some stuff hands-on alongside us, go for it. But we're talking here in this particular session about kind of GraphQL microservices in general. Before we get to the GraphQL part, I like to talk about kind of scaling in general and how that relates to GraphQL scaling too. So I'm going to show you some slides, Tracy. I hope you don't mind. Awesome. So we're going to think about scaling as it relates to this scale cube. So down here in the lower left-hand corner represents kind of the least scaled version of an application, all the way up to the upper right-hand corner where we're dealing with a bunch of different microservices, maybe a bunch of databases, and a ton of instances. So we scale on instances, on microservices, and by partitioning, creating little sections of data that we can work with. So let's talk about this as it relates to an advice booth. This is some beautiful art that my coworker made, Alex Banks, and we're talking about scaling scaling in general as it relates to this advice booth. So let's say we have an advice booth. Tracy, I feel like you're good at giving advice. So maybe this is your advice booth.
And I have lots of advice.
I know you do, and it's all good advice. So just helping people all day, every day. So this advice booth, we're really good at giving advice. Tracy's really good at giving advice. So we are trying to deal with this huge audience of users, and all of them are coming to our advice booth at the same time. One way that we can handle this advice a little bit better is we can create different instances of this app. So we could create different versions of this advice booth, and these copies are going to be able to handle more traffic. So this is how we scale something on instances. And these instances, right, are going to just be little copies of the same application. This could be multiple processes running on one machine. This could be a bunch of different machines running behind a load balancer. And these could be spread out all over the world. So we're not quite to the GraphQL part yet because we have to still talk about scaling data. So we're still talking about our advice booth, right? We have records for each person who has come to our advice booth. Now, again, everybody wants their information about the advice. They're coming to get that data all at the same time. So we need to figure out some sort of a way of serving these users better. So one way that we could do that is we could break down our database into different segments. So that could be on last name, that could be on location, or some other type of property. But this is going to mean that people get their data faster. So this is called horizontal partitioning or sharding. We're breaking down our database into different chunks. All right. So microservices. Tracy, do you remember when every talk you would go to at every single conference was all about going from a monolith to microservices? That was such a talk all the time. And it still continues to be because it's such a big deal, right? We're trying to scale out our teams, and the microservice architecture is a super nice way of handling that. So one way that we could handle the traffic that's coming to our super popular advice booth is that we could break down our advice booth into, instead of copies or instead of database instances, we could create an advice booth for finance, love, wellness, break it down by topic. And then we can even scale out, obviously the love advice is the most popular advice, so we could scale that out on instances on another axis as well. So we got all these different containers, all these different microservices, and it allows us to go from that monolith, that one location where everybody can get all of this data, to a bunch of different microservices. So if you're working on the shows team and I'm working on the search team, we can work on our own part of the app. We don't have to just deal with this single application. And then if I decide that, hey, building checkout kind of is terrible because we have to deal with payment processing, and that's a lot of effort and that's a lot of liability as well. We can swap out some of those microservices for third-party services. So we got Stripe handling our payments, Auth0 handling our authorization. So a lot of different options when it comes to microservices. Now, we've gone on a long journey. We've talked a lot about stick figures and Stripe, but we haven't really been talking about GraphQL. So here's where the GraphQL part shows up, right? We got clients over here on the left-hand side. From these clients, a typical GraphQL request will send a query to a GraphQL API that sits in front of all of these various data sources. So the data sources could be databases, REST APIs, cloud services, whatever. The GraphQL API is going to collect all of that data, and it's going to return that in a single response. So what's really cool about this is that there's this one location where we can get all of our data. And I know that a lot of us, when we're working on a GraphQL project, even though we might be dealing with different data sources back here, we're still getting the thing that we like about microservices out of this architecture, right? We can go to one spot and get all of the data. So here's the microservices part, right? When we talk about there's a lot of vocabulary words that describe GraphQL microservices. You might have heard of Apollo Federation or a unified graph. People talk about super graphs and subgraphs, and there's all these different words. But really what we're talking about is we want to keep the thing we like about GraphQL, which is the single location to get all of our data. In this architecture, we call it the gateway. It's like the front door of all of our GraphQL, right? But then we can get what we like about microservices at the same time. So let's say we have a team that works on the account service, the color service, the review service, all this different stuff. There's a team that's going to be able to work on that without having to talk to one another. So they can manage their own part of the domain, manage their own schema, and all of that is going to be orchestrated behind the gateway. So this diagram here is really, this is Apollo Federation. This is Federation in general. You don't have to use Apollo to use Federation, but there's a really nice pattern here so that if you or I is coming to the website or mobile application to get some data, we're going to fetch that data from the gateway. But the gateway is really stitching together all of these different GraphQL microservices. So we're kind of building this other layer in between, which is pretty cool. So have you seen other folks, Tracy, using this kind of thing? Like, are people talking about federation, or what's the word on the street?
I feel like everyone is talking about federation, and that's all I hear about all the time, every day, all the day. But I think, one of the things that I always tell people when I talk to people about GraphQL is just like when trying to sell companies to use GraphQL.
Yeah, for sure.
Is very much this idea of like GraphQL will help you. I think this is very appealing for like, kind of like the backend developers as well. They're trying to move from, a more microservices approach from a monolith. Yeah. And they have, a difficult time doing so. But like GraphQL, if you do that and you're able to more decouple the front end and the back end, then all of a sudden it's so much easier. And that really, I feel like, gets people to buy into, hey, this is why GraphQL is actually so useful for you, because like now you can have more of a microservices architecture.
Totally. And I think that one of the things that's really tricky about GraphQL is that there's a schema. There's this document that describes all of your APIs types. And for a long time, teams have been expected to build one schema. And oftentimes that's literally like one document. And everybody on the team is working on this one document. And it's a text file essentially. And that is like, that can cause chaos, I feel like. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to manage your own little part of your app without having to work with literally every other developer on your team. That could be really tricky. So as we can see, like modularizing code is a really cool thing.
So just like for people who are listening, when we talk about GraphQL microservices, it's like more of an architecture and a concept. It's not so much like I want GraphQL microservices. So like I need to go, install this package somewhere. It's more just thinking about it from like an architectural standpoint.
Totally. There's a lot of different ways to build something like this. And you could build something on your own. You could use a tool for it. But the whole idea is the important part, which is let's break down our data into these different, maybe it's like by type, or maybe it's by developer team, but really modularizing your code in a way that you still get the GraphQL stuff you like, which is being able to send one query, get one response, but this helps you break it down.
Yeah. And is it like not a good idea to do this?
Well, I used to think that reaching for federation too early was a bad idea, but I'm kind of being proven wrong by teams who are starting things out from this approach. I think if you are trying to wrap an existing API, like a lot of times people get started with GraphQL, they wrap a REST API and see what it's like to use it. They set up Apollo client or relay or something and they get some caching from that. So I would say you probably don't need it if you're trying to build something small, you're trying to just get started. But it may be that if you do have a big developer team, that starting out with federation is a good idea. So I wouldn't hesitate to use it. I think sometimes there's an idea that if you're just getting started, don't use it. But I've been proven wrong on that quite a bit lately.
And so for those people who haven't really been around in the GraphQL world that much, and they're hearing all these words being thrown around, like for example, GraphQL Microservices, federation. What were some of the other ones? I've heard so many.
I've spit out a lot of words. Unified graph is one that I hear a lot of. A gateway.
Are they all talking about exactly the same thing?
Yes, totally.
Okay, so like it's just that the GraphQL world has not come together, in terms of naming the thing that, there's like 4 different ways to talk about the same exact thing.
Totally. And isn't that the best thing about our industry is that there's always 35 million ways to say one thing. But yeah, the whole idea is if you hear words like federation or microservices or things like that, we're thinking about kind of these 2 slides back to back, right? With a traditional architecture, we have the single GraphQL server. With Apollo Federation or any sort of federated architecture, we're dealing with a bunch of different GraphQL servers behind a gateway.
Cool. That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing this with us. It's like really nice to be able to again, just break it down and really understand what's going on. Are these slides anywhere that people can download?
Yeah, totally. So you can go to our repo here. It's github.com/moonhighway/Federation Nation. It's called Federation Nation because it rhymes, but there's a link to the slides there and a bunch of other resources if you want to dig deeper and start to build your own projects.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, everyone, look out for the next episode in this series of GraphQL API, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Eve.
Thank you.